Welcome back to Homeschooling with Classic Stories. For this week's reading, let's go ahead and get started. So make sure you've taken your book out of your box, you've removed the jacket, and this week we're taking a look at Two Bad Mice. So the first thing we need to do before we can start this story of Two Bad Mice is to go back and look at our map. And so if you need help, your map this week is in the corner. So you're going to be looking at the northwest side. And if you're having trouble with your map, you can see in other videos of how to talk about this idea of the northwest corner of your map. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we get too far into this story, this is actually a story that I really enjoyed. I think from other stories, you'll notice that I find some of the stories a little bit more frustrating, but this one is actually rather enjoyable. So I urge you not to skip this particular one if you do find yourself skipping some of the stories. It is up to you what sorts of morals you choose to talk about in your home. For us, the moral of this story is really talking about when you don't understand something, dealing with your feelings about it, and trying to make amends. So this one actually contains a lot of information that you can use. If you don't agree with some of the things that I say, that's fine. You can leave a comment below about not agreeing. But these are the things that we talked about in our home. For one, we started up at the top. So we see two dolls here in the story. And they do happen to be characters in the story, which is a little bit unusual for this style, but we have two female characters. In the next one, we get the impression that one is the cook and one is the homeowner, but we chose to do this as highlighting two different families. So this is a family. Lucinda and Jane are a family, and they live in this beautiful house, and they live a lifestyle that perhaps not everyone understands because, you know, some of their things are made of plastic or whatever, and that's different from the mice. So that's kind of the overwhelming way that we chose to interpret the story. Of course, if that is not something that your family is ready to talk about with your children, that's okay too. It is in the story. Beatrix Potter is explicitly that they're just two dolls, and you can leave it at that. But we chose to see it as two different families. So I did start off by talking about the colors. So we have this lovely pink house. So what color is the house? And then we talked about some of the things in the picture. What things do you see in the picture? Are these things real? These are two dolls. And so everything that's in their home we're going to see is not quite real. All right. Then we come to our next section with the food. What kind of foods do you see? And so just have your child name the different foods. If you have some plastic foods in your house, this is a great time for your child to run off and grab all the plastic foods that they have. They can bang them on the table because you'll see later on that will be important, the idea of banging them on the table and such. Then we come to our mice. And the mice are real in the sense that they are living and they are, well, you'll see if you haven't read the story yet. All right, so we have these two mice, and they are also another family. So we have Tom Thumb and his wife, Hunca Munca. So we have another family that is coming, and they see this beautiful house. Okay, at this point, we see words like scuffling, scratching noise. We see a lot of great words. The mice are essentially going to leave their hole and go to the house. So for this, I introduced to my son the word scurry, and we demonstrated what scurry was. So I had my son scurry across the ground as if he were a mouse. So Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca, and they are scurrying across to see the house. And look, here they are looking out to see if the coast is clear. This is all part of scurrying, this idea. All right, so they come to the doll's house. Look at the size of the mice compared to the doll's house. Is this house the right size for the mice? And of course, whatever your child answers is fine for this question. All right. And then, of course, in the next one, the things that they see, this is going to be a listening part. So you can see in this part what things that they see. They're going to see a lot of items. So for this, talking about what kind of things do they see when they look into the into the window, and what they're really seeing is a set dining room table. Okay, what do they try to eat first? They try to carve the ham. Oh no, what do you think is going to happen? So for this one, we did some prediction, because they are trying to cut up this ham that is obviously fake. All right, and then of course, we see Hunka Munka giving it a go, and she's trying. And then, what happens in the next picture? So for this, you're trying to establish a cause and effect of what happens to the ham. So for this one, you're going to have the ham being cut first by Tom Thumb, then by Hunka Munka giving it a try, and then finally the ham falls off the table. So I took these 3 pictures as if they were kind of cause and effect type pictures. All right, and then this is where the story gets a little frustrating, because this is the point where Tom Thumb decides to go into a wild rage. For this part, I asked my son, why is he angry? And he's angry because he's hungry, and he's angry because things aren't going his way. And so at this point, we also stopped and talked about, is this right for Tom Thumb to do? Do these things belong to him? But even if they did belong to him, do you destroy things when you get angry? What should you do when you get angry? So we talked a lot about anger in this particular picture. And then, of course, because he gets angry, we see him lose his temper. He also starts to say things that are really sort of impolite, right? So we start to see him being a little bit rude to his wife and all of this. And then they start really tearing up the house. So what we talked about for this was, what are they tearing up in this picture? And then what did he find out in this picture? So he went up the chimney, but there wasn't any soot. We had to talk about what soot was. My children have seen Mary Poppins, so we referred back to Mary Poppins for this one. If you have a fireplace, perhaps you actually have soot in your fireplace, but we do not. So Mary Poppins was a good frame of reference for this. All right. Then we have some other issues. What was the rice and the coffee? All of these things, what were they actually? So they're not the things that the mice expect. Instead, there's something else. And so then we see them working their way to the bedroom. We did talk about the rooms of the house. This takes place in the kitchen. What room does this take place in? What room does this take place in? The bedroom. So we did talk about the rooms of the house as well. And then we see the mice start stealing things. So they've gone from being hungry to destruction to now they're just stealing things. And so we did stop and kind of talk along the points about why this wasn't the right thing to do to the other family, to Jane and Lucinda's family, just because they don't really understand. They don't understand what their household is about. Doesn't mean that they should get angry. It doesn't mean that they should destroy things, and it certainly doesn't mean that they should steal from them. We should try and understand other people's lives and their homes instead of just trying to, react to them. Okay. All right. So all of this is where it starts to sort of wind down. They're stealing things. The bird cage doesn't fit. This was interesting. I asked my son if this bird was real, and he kind of figured out that the bird was not real because it belongs in the doll's house. So why would the mice want it? And that actually led to some interesting ideas about why would the mice want a fake bird. So don't feel shy about asking questions that you don't know the answer to. Usually, if for those of you who've been to Teachers College, sometimes it's very dangerous to ask questions that you don't know the answers to. But in this particular case, this led to some really interesting ideas of what the mice want to do with a fake bird. And so, feel free to give that a try. And then we come to the cradle. So they steal a cradle. And this is kind of where we start to get back on track, because the mice are starting to actually take things that they need. We saw them starting with, they're clearly hungry and they want something to eat, and now they're taking things for their babies. Again, this isn't right, but is much more understandable as to what's happening here. So kind of looking at both families and seeing what it is that they're trying to accomplish in this story. Okay, then they hear a noise and the dolls come back. So we see that the dolls come back. How do you think that the dolls felt when they saw their house? So they come back to this house and lots of things have been stolen and destroyed. How do you think that the dolls would have felt about this? And then, of course, we see Hunka Munka enjoying the things that don't belong to her. And how do you think Hunka Munka feels about this? And so that led to some of the complex emotions of, well, she feels happy because she has a cradle for her baby and a nice dress to wear. But at the same time, maybe she feels guilty because these things don't actually belong to her. Which actually turns out to work out nicely. So, we see the policeman come. He doesn't really do anything. It's up to your household how you choose to address this. That the policeman comes and nothing really comes of it. And the nurse, the little girl who is evidently a real person outside of the story, sets the mousetrap. This part was a little bit confusing to my son because these are two new characters, but we've always known that they've existed, right? If there's a dollhouse, there must be a child. And if there's a child in 1904, there's probably a nurse. So you as an adult may kind of have some inference to know that these characters exist, but your child might not. And so that this part we actually had to stop and talk a little bit about these characters because that was a little confusing. But then we get to the penance, I guess, which is really what it is, with them trying to pay off the dolls. And it's rather sweet that even though we've just been introduced to the little girl, the real owner of these things that were destroyed, we see that the mice still don't understand that the little girl is there. So that they didn't get caught in the mousetrap. Nothing comes of the mousetrap. Don't ever have to explain that one. Okay, they do pay off the dolls to apologize. And then, of course, at the end, we see that Hunka Munka comes back to clean up and set things better to right. So they are trying. They realize what they did was wrong and are trying to set things right and to try and be more understanding of the dolls and appreciative of the fact that they were able to get some nice things from the dolls. So this story has a lot of layers to it, and it can be taken in various ways that you want to. I personally think that the pictures are a little bit lovelier in this particular story. I'm not sure why, but I find these to be a little bit more interesting and the story to be easier to tell. So like my son was more riveted by this story than he perhaps has been for some of the other stories. So that is it for The Tale of Two Bad Mice. I will see you later on in the week to talk about the activities that we did with this story. But I hope that you have fun with this one and that you enjoy this story as much as I did. See you next time.